Okay, welcome to the Cold Ones. I'm here with Ike, our head brewer and owner here at BuckleDown, and I wanted to talk about our lagers. So we've been doing lagers for a long time here at BuckleDown, but I looked up at our board and realized we have 5 different lagers on tap. So I thought maybe you would walk us through our 5 different BuckleDown lagers.
I would love to. I guess maybe as a starting point, talk a little bit about lagers and what's different about them. So, obviously here at BuckleDown we do ales, we do lagers. Those are kind of the 2 broad spectrums of beer. Speaking about lagers, it's generally a colder fermented beer. It's not as fruity. Probably 90% of the world's beer is lager, just because how ubiquitous the American light lager style is. So that's, your Buds, Millers, Coors, the South African beers like Castle, Stella. These are all kind of in the lager category. So it's a very popular style of beer. I have enjoyed brewing lagers for a long time. So I still remember the first time I made a lager when I was home brewing. It was a Vienna lager, and I was just blown away by how malt forward some of the lager yeast can be. And we use, for most of our beers, we use a German lager style. It's from Munich, it's a southern German style, and it's a very malty character. So whereas ale yeast can be a little bit fruitier and tend to really accentuate the hoppiness of beer, which is why IPA, India Pale Ale, works well. The fruitiness from the yeast, the hop notes, they all kind of meld together to create like this synergy. The same thing happens on the lager side with the maltier lager strains. So Oktoberfest, Viennas, things like that, you can really bring out a much more nuanced and like a bigger malt character with those yeasts and those kind of styles, which is why Oktoberfest is such a big style in southern Germany and Munich Dunkel, things like that. Very malt-forward beers work well. So that's, I guess, just like a overview of kind of what lagers are, and I like to make them. I like to drink them.
It's
They're my
interesting
favorite thing to drink.
It's interesting how you kind of, walk down the line of what the yeast does for ales and lagers. So I guess tell us a little bit about this first one, our Cactus Pants Mexican style.
Yeah, so Cactus Pants has been our lightest beer. We've got a light, and also another light option, Ike's, but we'll talk about that. Cactus Pants came about when I was in Florida, maybe 2016, 2015, 2017, somewhere around that time. 2016, 2017, drinking like a ridiculous amount of Coronas and Modelos. And I thought, I am a brewer and I have a brewery, so maybe we should make this kind of beer at home. Thus, Cactus Pants was born. It started out in a few different iterations getting to Cactus Pants. We had was a lumberjack beer was the first one.
Canadian lager.
Canadian lager. That was kind of a manufactured name based on that project we were doing with that Canadian rye whiskey. But that's really the birthplace of Cactus Pants. It's about 20% corn, Pilsner malt, a little 6-row. Corn is generally used in these kind of beers because it's, I guess, it's a easily obtainable grain in Mexico, as well as obviously here. Miller's a corn-based lager. A lot of them are. You got corn and rice are kind of your big adjuncts. The old school way of saying adjuncts, not talking about vanilla and chocolate, but we're talking about additional fermentables that are not malt. So corn is a kind of key component here. It gives us a little bit of sweetness. It lightens the body quite a bit. And then just barley malt to make that corn into sugar for the lager yeast to ferment. Touch of hops, not much. We don't want a beer like this, and they aren't typically very hoppy. It goes great with lime, I'm not shy to say. Squeeze a lime in there, it's delicious. But this is fermented with our house lager strain, which is a German style. So it definitely favors the maltiness. So it's got a little bit more sweetness, a little bit of that Pilsner malt stands through, and then the corn really kind of lightens things up. And that's Cactus Pants.
Yeah, it's very, very drinkable. A little bit of that fruity note, like you mentioned.
I love Cactus Pants. I think it's our #1 selling beer at BuckleDown now,
That's true.
which is wild.
You're seeing a lot more Mexican lagers in the market, so I think people are more aware of what they're going to taste like
Sure.
in craft. I think that's definitely what brings people to the table on it.
I mean, we're probably one of the first Mexican, at least in the Chicago market. I don't know if there were a lot of Mexican lagers before we did it. I mean, there were things like, what the hell is that one that, there's Ska makes one. Yeah, there's only a few of them. And I think a lot of them are born because brewers like to drink a lot of beer. So you can't really drink a ton of 10% double IPA.
And it's just easy to come back to over and over.
Sure. Yeah.
So what would you say is the biggest difference between these two? We call this an American lager. Again, lower ABV, 4.8 versus 4.5. You can see in color, fairly similar color.
Yeah.
So what would you say would be the biggest difference in the Ike's original?
Yeah, it's really yeast driven. So this one's a North American yeast strain. So definitely not as malty. Doesn't tend to accentuate that malt note. I'd say this is like a crisper feel, like a crisper character, where I think Cactus Pants has some sweetness. It stays with you a little bit in a good way. This has got a much drier, much like crisper yeast that we use in this one. So it's an experimental yeast I've been playing with. Yeah, it's just crisper. So it's similar. It's got Cactus is a little bit of Vienna malt, which to give it a little bit of color. This does not have Vienna. It's got a distiller's malt that we use, which is, it's like a 6-row malt in that it has more enzyme potential, more enzyme power to change, to basically convert other starches into maltose. So this is a more fermentable beer in that we use distiller's malt to make sure that corn is converted over to maltose. Instead of in the Cactus, we do not use a distiller's malt. Right. So this by default is drier, more fermented, maybe a little lower cal, and just a crisper finish.
Yeah, definitely some dryness on the finish. Again, something that makes you want to go back to it. Like you can drink a couple of these.
Yeah, this is a very dry finish, and those North American yeasts they're just a little bit different. They definitely trend towards a little bit crisper, more neutral. Some of them even have like a little apple note to them. Very, very different than like the European strains. Even though lager strains are not as varied as ale strains, because lagers are relatively new, it's the isolation of lager yeast is a pretty recent thing in the terms of like beer world. It happened in the last like 400 or 500 years. Pretty recent when people have been making beer for arguably 10 to 20,000 years. Maybe had led to the domestication of, that's not right, not domestication, but led to agriculture. Civilization.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yes.
I knew it
It's
ended
very
in
true.
a T-I-O-N.
I mean, what would make you stop? Alcohol.
Yeah. I would like to have more beer to drink. Why don't we store some of this grain? Let's do it.
All right, so we're moving on. I
But
love
also
this.
not very hoppy.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of, I guess stylistically or philosophically, I want the lagers to be like drinkable.
Yep.
So, we haven't treaded into like the Baltic porters, which are fermented with lager yeast. They're just huge. The box beers, they're mega beers. We don't do a lot of that. Maybe someday we'll experiment a little more with some of those more, I'd say like more extreme lagers. But across the board, I think for us, it's just very drinkable.
Yeah, both of these are very drinkable. Speaking of drinkability, this is probably the lager I drink the most here at BuckleDown. Our oldest lager here in the brewery, Fritzikoff's Pilsner.
Yeah, Fritzikoff. Sorry, just chugged that sample glass.
I'm going to finish mine while you talk.
Do it. Yeah, Fritzikoff was our first I believe it was the first lager we did, period. I think Fritzikoff was first, Oktoberfest was second. I think we first brewed that in 2014, so that's going now on 8 years ago. I do remember sitting with you in Philadelphia talking about when we first decided to put this into cans. We were drinking a ton of Pilsner at like some random place in Philadelphia at a trade show. I'm like, we should also, again, same thing, why don't we make some lager?
Right.
So Fritzikoff, we call it a German style, right? We call it a German style.
Yeah.
I don't know if it says it on the can. But it's more of like, I would say, an American craft version of a German style lager. It's like my interpretation of what these beers are like in Germany. So generally the German beers are just not as hoppy. They don't use as much hops. It's just not kind of the style there. Those come off. And again, with the disclaimer that I'm not drinking like week-old Pilsners from Germany. They come over here, they're in green bottles, they're a little bit different.
Right.
Probably the fastest one we get is like Pilsner or Kel, and that's awesome when it's brand new. That's very hoppy. And German Pils is a copy of Czech Pils. I mean, the Czechs were the first ones to master indirect kilning of malt, so they were able, whereas before, going back hundreds of years, beers are much smokier. Malts were dried, right? So like more like the Bamberg style Rauch beers. Malts were dried with like smoke. That's why Scotch is so smoky. That malt is kilned with peat smoke, peat fires. So once coal fire was developed and they were able to indirectly heat these malts, the Moravian malts in Czech Republic were the first ones to really master that. So and plus their water chemistry there, they were able to produce a very, very pale beer. The Germans got a hold of it and were like, this is better. When you were not drinking in like a clay mug and glass became widely available and you could see the beer, it's like, oh, this pale beer looks better.
You can just see that color. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it looks better. Jesus, so that was a long aside about German Pilsner. But yeah, this is really our interpretation of what a German Pilsner should be. So it's all Pilsner malt, 100% Pilsner malt. So it's very pale, very straw-colored. It's got a high level of hops for a Pilsner beer. It's not a Cactus or Ike's where it's just like little hops. This has got a good punch of hops in the kettle. So we don't dry hop this beer, but it's got a lot of hops that were added into the boil. We use domestic Pacific Northwest versions of noble hops for this beer, so we don't use German hops, we don't use Czech hops.
I was going to say, you call it American version of a German Pils, but it's definitely a different nose to the hops than American beer.
Oh yeah. So I think a lot of that is it's just a question of how much we use. This is certainly much, much higher hopped than any domestic lager would be, than your Bud Miller Coors. And the hops have like a nice like fruity, floral kind of character to
Yeah,
them.
you definitely get floral.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is nice.
It's a great beer.
Yeah.
I love Fritzikoffs.
To me, like the little bit of bitterness, again, is like a palate cleanser. It adds some dryness to it. It just makes it, to me, a more refreshing beer. Like, we talk about pale ales endlessly, about like refreshing light, but that bitterness, is a palate cleanser. And to me, like a German or European style Pils definitely has that kind of refreshing bite that's probably why I drink it the most of our main lagers.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that bitterness does make you want to come back and have another sip, for sure. Yeah, I love this beer. We've been making it for a long, long time. It's basically the same exact beer, where some of the IPAs we make will change a little bit with hops, like different hops become available, different things are hot. This beer has been the same since 2014. It's a very, very tasty beer. It's the same thing, House German yeast strain on this one as well. So it's got a lot of hops, but it's got a nice malt balance to it. It's got some sweetness. You can definitely pick up those Pilsner malt notes. Yeah.
So you did go on an aside talking about golden Pilsners, which I get it. I mean, it started a whole category. But obviously, the next two lagers are a little not golden. These guys are a little more amber. So,
Yeah.
talk to me about our newest release, just coming out this weekend, Dia de los Pantalones.
Yes,
our Mexican-style amber lager.
Mexican-style amber. Yeah, so we've done amber lagers in the past, obviously, with Fritz-Cuffs. We did a Vienna lager earlier this year that was delicious. That Vienna was brewed more of the continental European style, so it used our German yeast and it used malts from that part of the world. This is our Mexican style, so this uses our North American yeast strain. So again, it's a crisper finish. It's not nearly as much malt complexity as our Vienna earlier this year was. It's a drier. It's a drier finish for sure than you would get with the other Vienna. With the Vienna we did. Now, interestingly, the Mexican brewers have kept the Vienna lager style alive, so they don't really make these in Austria. I mean, maybe a little bit, maybe the craft breweries do, but some guys, I think Santiago Graf, a couple of these dudes came over. The dude that started Dos Equis, so that was in 1900. They came over. In Germany and Mexico had there was a big relationship. Germany and Austria and Mexico did a lot of stuff together back in the day. So if anybody remembers the Zimmermann telegraph that the Germans tried to get the Mexicans to attack us in World War I, there was a relationship there, a diplomatic relationship, as well as, that brewing culture definitely came to Mexico from Germany and Austria, which is why I think Mexico is one of the top 3 or 4 biggest beer producers and consumers in the world. I mean, think about the mega lager breweries they have there: Corona, Modelo. I mean, Pacifico. They're a giant. Beer is a big part of the culture, and it's awesome that they kind of really kept this alive. So the craft breweries have definitely brought back Vienna lager, but it was really kept alive in more of a commercial sense by the Mexican brewers. So this is kind of our ode to them.
I love it. I get, a nice nose, a little sweetness on the nose. Is that mostly malt, or is that coming from the yeast?
That's more of a malt-driven character, but the yeast strain we use definitely reacts differently with the amount of we use Munich malt, Vienna malt. Munich and Vienna are the big malts in this one. A little bit of Pilsner. That's what gives you its color. It's got almost an Oktoberfest color.
Yeah, I was shocked to see it's actually almost darker. I thought the Oktoberfest would be a little darker. It tastes a little darker, a little heavier, the Oktoberfest to me.
Agreed.
So I thought when I poured it in the glass, I thought it would be darker. I was a little shocked.
For sure.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how this North American yeast strain that we're using, the other lager yeast strain that we use, reacted with the dark malt. It's got a little bit of a spicy note to it. Again, not a lot of hops, no corn in this beer. It's straight malt beer. But yeah, it's real tasty. We had some of this with a michelada yesterday. That was delicious. Or not with the michelada mix.
Yep.
It was really good. But yeah, this is just an interesting beer we brewed, just trying to expand that Cactus Pants brand a little bit into a different style. And just, yeah, it's a very unique beer, I would say.
I dig it. So last but not least, and maybe one of our most popular beers, period, let alone lagers, our Oktoberfest. It's a fan favorite, and anticipation is always huge. It's a fun time of year for people to just enjoy beer, but this beer itself, people definitely come to get it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been brewing Oktoberfest again since 2014. I think we first started canning it maybe in 2016. Yeah, I love this beer. It's a fun time to brew. That time of year leading up to Oktoberfest, weather getting cooler. This beer is definitely falls in the drinkable category. So my philosophy on Oktoberfest beer is that you should be able to drink it in like a 1 liter stein. So whereas I think a lot of craft Oktoberfest are maybe more on the caramely, sweeter end of the spectrum, I'm not a big fan of that style. So this is only all base malt. Vienna, Munich, and dark Munich, which is like a more highly kilned Munich that's like dark toast and like crusty bread. It's got a really cool malt character to it. So this beer is just the 4 continental base malts. We don't use any crystal malt. We don't use any. And a crystal malt is just it's like a stewed malt that we use in a lot of English styles. That's very sweet. Like you get like plums and figs and like cookies. It's like it's a sweet malt, and it adds a lot of color. It's got its place. Right. My opinion, its place is not in an Oktoberfest beer. Right. So really the idea here is very drinkable, like a complex, elegant maltiness. We use our German strain in this, so it definitely brings out a ton of malt and just a little bit of hops, like probably more hops than like a Cactus or an Ike's, but not nearly as much as a Fritz Gus.
To your point on the yeast, I know it's a different yeast than the Vienna we were talking about. Like I brought up the nose of the Vienna. This has a little less of a nose off the top of it.
I'd agree with that for sure. But it's a huge maltiness, though. I mean, like, whereas I think the Dia de los Pantalones has like a little bit of that. There's like a spicy note from the yeast and the malt doing their thing. This is just much more. It's just like a malt bomb.
Yeah,
but it definitely to me
drinkable.
Point. It drinks lighter than it smells.
Right. The first craft beer I really got into was an Oktoberfest, and it was one of the big ones, Sam Adams.
Yeah.
And now if I go back to that, it is too sweet for me. Like it doesn't fit the taste profile I want. To your point on the Oktoberfest, like I want it to be that nod towards the winter beers that are coming, but still have that drinkability, and this definitely does it. You know?
Yeah, I think even from a color standpoint, ours is like a little more dark orange than like that real copper amber that like a Sam Adams gets, and they definitely use the crystal malts.
Right.
Nothing wrong with it. It's just a different way to go about that style. But I'm with you. I think that's a delicious beer. I really like it, but it's sweet. It's thick.
Yeah. It's not as drinkable, you know. So maybe not a whole stein.
For sure.
Well, I appreciate this. I mean, I've been selling beer for a long time, and I learned a ton. I learned a history lesson about a telegraph from Germany to Mexico I knew nothing about.
Yeah.
But no, this is fun. Like, we drink a ton of lagers. To your point about the whole market is covered in lagers. I mean, until the craft movement, like 99% of the beers drink and were lagers. So it's kind of fun that now craft brewers are going into it, and I love this selection of lagers that we're offering. So.
Sure. And yeah, it's cool that we're not like a lager specific brewery, but we've been making them for a long time, and I think we make them very well. And I think we're going to keep experimenting. Like I liked our 2 most recent experiments, not experiments, but our 2 newest lagers. I think were great. That was a new yeast we'd never played with before, and I think from my standpoint as a brewer, we're just going to keep on trying new stuff. Keep on pushing that envelope. Like some of the Japanese lagers are very intriguing to me. Some more of that rice base. So I would say expect more stuff from us on the lager side. We obviously do a lot of new beers. That's pretty important, obviously, for any brewery.
Right.
But as a lager brewery, we still make some pretty
awesome good lagers.
Damn good lagers.
We'll keep on keeping on. Thanks, Ike.
Cheers, Johnny. Yeah, thanks, buddy.
Cheers.